Hello, can you guys hear me all right? All right, so myself Sri, I'm an Android engineer at Y Media Labs.
And I'm Eddy Gann, a senior product designer, also from Y Media Labs.
All right, um, thanks for joining us. So let's talk about permissions today. Me and Eddy were working on an app which has a lot of permissions needed, and we talk about permissions every day. Eddy hates me for that. So we put everything in the presentations and sort of share the knowledge that we have about permissions. So let me start with a little bit of history. I don't know whether you guys remember this. When Android first came, if you need a permission, just find out what permission you needed. Just put that in manifest. That's it, right? That's what like free world. You can do whatever you want, right? So there was a lot of problem with that, right? User doesn't know like what are the permission we are putting in the app. It's like developer has full control over it, right? When user try to install the app, they show you, oh, these are the list of permissions you have. Then they accept that permission, then app will be installed on their devices. And after the Marshmallow released, there's a big change happened, right? That's when runtime permissions were introduced. What do you mean by runtime permissions? So all the critical assets are like there's a gate you need to access, right? We need permission. So all the dangerous permissions now we need to ask for the permission. So this is kind of thing, right? So whenever you want to ask the resource, and system will ask you for the dialogue, right? Then user has an option like whether you want to allow or you want to deny the permission, which is kind of straightforward. When consider this as a big change happened in between that time, this suddenly one release, this came in, but it came with a good amount of documentation. How we need to handle the permission, how we need to handle the denied scenario, and also give you a documentation of what is permission ratio, how to ask the permission, how to educate the user about permission before asking them. This was quite okay, all right, right? And after that, Android 10 released. Now everybody is concerned about the privacy very much, right? If you look at after the 10 releases and 11 releases and 12 releases, every time you hear about privacy a lot. People care about privacy a lot. So when we build an app, when we have an app where the location permissions was a crucial thing for us, every time the release happened, we were thinking, okay, what's going to change now, right? So we were waiting for Android 10 to release. Unfortunately, this happened, right? Initially, if you think about the location, foreground permission and background permission combined. Like when you ask it, you get both the permission. What I mean by foreground permission, right? Let's say you want to interact with the app, and you just using the Google map, right? Then you need only foreground permission because you're interacting with the app. Let's think about the scenario. Your phone is switched off, not switched off. Your phone is in your pocket. You walked in a store where you have Bluetooth beacon in it. Now you need to see a notification. That time you need to have like a background location permission. So in Android 10, what happened? That permission split into two, foreground permission and background location permission. This was kind of a big change, and it came with a good documentation, how to handle that, how to ask the permission, which are all already there in the documentation. But this was kind of challenge for us to kind of figure out how to educate the user, things like that. And 11, again, another change. So this, and again, we have to, whatever things we design, again, we have to redesign and accommodate change for Android 11 also. Because in Android 11, you won't get that background permission within the app. User has to kind of leave the app and go to settings. This is one more hurdle we have to solve. Let's go in a little bit deep, how exactly this is being done. Everybody is familiar with this pop-up, right? This is kind of very binary, very straightforward, allow and deny. But you basically have two options, right? You can deny. If you deny multiple times, okay, you won't see this dialog again. You have to go to settings. Android 6 to 9, this was a kind of norm everybody is kind of familiar with, user is familiar with, designers are familiar with. It's just okay, right? So we need it, we ask them. And one more other thing, like there's two kind of location permission, right? Either you need like coerced location, which is like loose kind of permission, right? It won't be that accurate. It's like accuracy is a range around 3 miles to 4 miles. But you want to find location, right? Let's say you want to have a 10 by 10 direction. you define in the manual saying, I need a find location permission, you ask for them. Here is Android 10. So you look at see the difference. There are the two model. You can see that, right? In that, you see the allow only while using the app is foregone location permission. But on the right, you see allow all the time, allow while using the app. That's a split between the foreground and background. How do you ask them? The system introduces a new permission. You put that access background location permission managed first. You ask with combination of what kind of permission accuracy you need. You need find location or requires location. So combine them, just ask for it, you get it. You're going to see any one of the model based on what you're requesting. But again, that's change in Android 11, right? If you run the same piece of code in Android 11, it won't work. Because in Android 11, things have changed. Let's say you want to have a background location permission. First, you need to ask for foreground location permission. Then you're gonna you ask for the background location permission. Just like migrating and updating the permission you have to do, right? And if you notice that first dialog you see in the app itself, but the second one when you ask, you throw the user settings page. And you have to educate the user upfront saying that you have to choose allow all the time. So how do we do that? We need to come up with a better UX to explain that this is the option you have to choose. And again, on top of that, right? So there are two things which I mentioned: access find location, or queries location, right? These were the developer-only things before. We have this, whenever you need it, we request them. But user doesn't have any clue about it. Now the privacy is a big concern. Now this is being exposed to user. Now user has a control over what kind of accuracy you want to give to the app. So whenever you request for permission, now you have to specify what kind of accuracy you want. Let's say you need only the approximate location, then you request for coerced location. If you need a find location, then you ask for a find location, right? And let's say the scenario where you always have an option to upgrade to precise location. Let's say you have a coerced location right now, then you need, let's say you want to share the current location with somebody, then you can always update your permission preciseness, right? And this, if you think about this, right? So permission dialog is very crucial for most of the app, at least for the app we were building it. And the problem is we only have a seed window of first time, right? First time is always a seed window. So we have to think twice when to show them, right? So we were coming with a different UX, and we A/B test a couple of things. And yeah, we have a better way to deal with that. So Eddy going to cover how we can solve that problem with the better UX.
Awesome. Thanks, Sri. Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of technical complexity when it comes to implementing permissions in your app, but there's also a lot of user experience things to consider as well. So that's what I'm going to be jumping into a little bit. But before I get into any of the actual visual examples of the do's and don'ts of implementing permissions in your app, I wanted to kind of start with a foundational thing that's basically just paraphrased from the human interface guidelines from Apple, as well as the material design guidelines from Google, which is that apps should only request permissions when they have clear need and value and context for why they're making those requests, right? And that's been, over the last few years, more and more emphasized from these companies. So it might be kind of tempting to just get all of the permissions out of the way up front, maybe in like an onboarding flow where you've got a few screens, or maybe just one screen where you have like multiple steps like this. The issue with this is it's really hard to convey the context and the value to the user as to why you're asking for multiple things. And you might think, okay, well, we'll make it work. We'll just tweak some of the copy and explain it really well, and it'll be fine. Let's just get all the permissions at once. Unfortunately, that might help a little bit, but it's more than likely that you won't really see much of an uptick in adoption for those permissions still, because as I'm sure some of you guys know well, is that users don't tend to read everything on the screen. They usually just try to get through some of the onboarding and just get into the app. So you likely will still run into issues if you try to do it this way, even if you try to tweak the copy and make it explain all the different features and all the cool stuff that they're going to get. There's also another thing that Sri and I ran into in the app that we had been working on previously, where there were some dependencies that happened because the app that we were working on, they insisted that we got all of the permissions before letting the users use certain features at all. And that's something that you definitely need to avoid as much as possible, where you have dependencies on multiple permissions needing to be enabled for any feature to function. And the main takeaway from something like this is that you really just need to try to meet users where they are. And by that I mean, if they don't want to give background location permission, there still is value that you can provide to them with the limited permissions that they give you. It might not be as cool of a feature and the top amount of functionality that you want, but you should still try to deliver some value to them regardless of if they gave you all of the permissions that you want, rather than just locking them out of a feature entirely. So that's some of the stuff that you really want to make sure you avoid as far as the user experience, and like trying to cram all of the permissions into one like flow or onboarding or something like that. But what does some of the good user experience stuff look like? So I mocked up this app as totally fictional social media app here, where you can talk to your friends about music, meet up, share music with them. And you can see a couple different comparison here. So you got the screen on the right that we were talking about that is not the right user experience. And then the one on the left, imagine you've logged into this app and you're just kind of exploring it. This is the first time you've used it. And you go into your messages section. Now, this could be a simple, just like empty state where you just say you don't have any messages and leave it at that. But this is one of a moment where you could actually capitalize on the context of the message center here and really bring in some of those permissions into it. So in this case, you could say something like, you haven't received any messages yet, but you don't want to miss any, when your friends actually do send a message to you, and giving them a clear call to action to opt into the notification permissions in the right context where they see the value gives us a really good opportunity to make sure that we don't just prompt them for something without them knowing the value and denying it. Because like Sri was saying, it's kind of the first time you ask a user for the permissions, it's really like the one chance you get before it's a lot more difficult to get it. So giving them some clear value here, as well as a call to action that separates them from that modal, really does help increase the adoption of it. And you can kind of see, obviously, you don't actually get all of these modals all at the same time, but as you can see, there's a definite difference in how much friction a user has to go through comparative to spreading out the permissions that you need in context of the specific feature versus just asking them to go through 3 steps and getting permissions for notification, location, Bluetooth, all of that. So how does this concept scale across the whole app experience? Like, how do we get those other permissions then? So you can do a lot of different things depending on the scenario. In this fictional app, I thought of an experience where when you're messaging someone, if they ask you where you at, or where are you right now, maybe that's a moment where we can quickly offer a suggestion to share your current location. If you don't have location permissions enabled, that could be a great time to let a user know that that feature is a thing, and also give them that moment to opt into the location permission to enable that. So showing them that there's some value, a feature that they're going to potentially get, and enticing them to actually enable the permission that would allow that feature to work. And then similarly, on the far right screen, say someone with great taste in music shares a song that you really want to hear on maybe like a Bluetooth speaker or something like that you have to make sure you get the full experience. Interacting with trying to like share that song to a Bluetooth device would be a perfect moment to prompt them for a Bluetooth permission, since they've already shown interest in wanting to use a feature that needs that permission. So that connection can be made really easily there. And you can see, as you spread that across the experience, they're really only needing to engage with like one modal at a time to make it a lot simpler without loading them up with a whole bunch of cognitive stuff to think through and all the friction that might actually cause them to give up on the app and leave the experience. So Now, if you do have a situation where maybe they denied a permission that you did really want them to enable for a certain feature, it isn't the end of the road if they deny it or you don't get that permission in the sense that you want. There are other ways that you can also still kind of like nudge them in the right direction to get them to maybe enable that permission that they had denied previously, or just like upgrade that permission from background location permission to foreground location permission, or rather the other way around, foreground to background location permission. And you can use something like what you see here with like that banner at the top. But something that you really want to make sure to keep in mind when doing stuff like this, when you're reminding users to enable various permissions, is that you don't want to cause those reminders to be so invasive that it ruins the experience for them. So you really need to make sure you're working with between the dev and the design team to establish what's the right, level of intensity that you want to remind them to turn on notifications or location or something like that. Because it very much depends on how crucial it is for the feature. Like something like notifications in this case, it probably wouldn't need something quite as heavy-handed as a red banner that can't be dismissed. It might be something a little bit more like the one on the right where you say it's a banner that appears every once in a while. You can manually dismiss it if you want and it'll just go away. But something like location, in the case of maybe a turn-by-turn directions app or something, if you don't have that, that's going to be basically break most of the experience. So maybe that's a case for something a little bit more persistent. So it really, like I said, depends on the context, which really just like feeds back to that original like kind of foundational thing that I started with. Pretty much everything with permissions, you want to just keep in mind what's the context, what's the value to the user, and really focus on that, because that's going to help 9 times out of 10 guide you to the right implementation for permissions in your app. So the last thing I really wanted to leave you guys with is like a public service announcement of sorts, which is that the future is just going to be more user control, more granular permissions, and more focus on privacy, as I'm sure you guys have seen in various talks and stuff like that from the likes of Apple and Google and stuff like that, where they have elevated that stuff in their talks and in the features of their OS more and more each year. And as you heard from Sri in the history of Android, that's been more and more difficult for you guys to get all of those permissions each year. So that's going to probably be a continued trend. So yeah, and that's it.